Okay, the first question that you want to have down for a study question is, what is the isosceles triangle theorem? And that essentially is, if you have an isosceles triangle, so let's go ahead and draw an isosceles triangle using our ruler. Nice straight edge. So if you have an isosceles triangle and two of the sides are congruent, and that would be shown by the hash marks, then the two angles across from those congruent sides are also congruent, and those are called the base angles. So if the two sides of a triangle are congruent, or if two sides of a triangle are congruent, then the angles opposite those sides are also congruent. And that can work the other way as well, whereas if you know that there are two congruent angles, then the sides opposite the angles would be congruent. Okay, so go ahead and glue this next little sheet onto your notebook, and we will find the value of the missing variable, or we should probably add variables. So that theorem, the isosceles triangle theorem, when you have two sides of an isosceles triangle that are congruent, then the angles opposite those sides, so angle B and angle C, are going to be congruent. So our first step is to identify the congruent angles based on the congruent sides, and then fill in the measurements that we can, because if these are your two base angles, B and C, then they would each be 64 degrees. Now to find x, we're going to use the triangle sum theorem, and that is that the three angles in a triangle, 2x, 64, and 64, the three angles of a triangle have a sum, meaning we add together, and they equal 180 degrees. Let's go ahead and take a second to solve for x. Pause the video, see if you get what I get. So you should get that x is 26. If you did not, raise your hand and we will come help you. Alright, number 2, same exact concept. You have two congruent sides, therefore you're going to have two congruent angles, and your congruent angles are going to be the angles across from the congruent sides. So x is really easy. X is just going to be the same as angle F. So x is going to be congruent to angle F, which is 70. And then y, now that we know that x is 70, y will be the triangle sum theorem again. And that is that the three angles in a triangle have a sum of 180 degrees. So we will get that y is equal to 40. And the last part of the theorem, this is what's called the converse, or the flip, is that if you are given two congruent base angles, you can now assume that the sides across from those angles are also congruent. So this side, 2x plus 4, would be congruent to or equal to the other side, 3x minus 10. And those sides are called legs, the congruent sides in an isosceles triangle. Okay, go ahead and take a second, solve for x, pause your video and see if you get what I get. Okay, so you should get that x is 14. If you did not, raise your hand and ask for help. And just to reiterate, the way that we check our algebra is we would substitute that 14 in to each side to make sure that each side is actually congruent, as we said they would be. So we would do 2 times 14 plus 4, which is going to give us 32. And then we would do 3 times 14 minus 10, which should also give us 32. And this is how we know that these two sides are congruent and that we solved for x correctly. Okay, now we're going to have a little bit of practice with our vocabulary of medians and altitudes. Go ahead and draw the figure and find the value of x. Take a second to draw the figure, and we will work through how to find x. Pause the video so you can draw this. The definition for altitude, as you defined earlier, an altitude is going to be a segment that connects the vertex of a triangle to the opposite side at a right angle. So as soon as you see the word altitude, we're looking for a 90-degree angle in our picture, and that's going to be where the line comes down to the other side of the triangle. And if this is 90, this would also be 90 if you were given an expression for either of those. So if it's an altitude, this angle BEC, is equal to 90 degrees. And they put an expression here of 4x plus 6. So we would say that 4x plus 6 is equal to 90 degrees, because the 4x plus 6 represents the measure 90. So solving for x, we would subtract 6 from both sides. We would get 4x equals 84. We would divide by 4, and we would get x is 21. And then we would substitute our x back into our original expression. 4 times 21 plus 6. 4 times 21 plus 6 should give us 90. And we got 90. And the last example, using another vocabulary word, is go ahead and draw the figure again and find the value of x. And this time we're going to use BA is the median of the triangle. So if you look back up at the vocabulary that you defined earlier in your textbook, a median is going to be a segment or a line that starts at the vertex of a triangle to the opposite side of that vertex at the side's midpoint. Or in other words, a median is in the middle of a side. So it's right directly cutting this side DC in half. So if you cut something in half, let's say one side is 5 centimeters, then the other side would also have to be 5 centimeters. If this is the midpoint, you've got two equal parts. So algebraically, if we're given two expressions, 10x minus 2 and 2x plus 30, if we're given two expressions and this is the median, then we would say that side AC, or segment AC here, would be equal to segment AD. And if segment AC is equal to AD, then the 2x plus 30 will hold the same value as 10x minus 2. Alright, go ahead and pause the video and see if you get what I get for the value of x. So we get that x is 4, and just to check our algebra, we would substitute 4 back into each expression, and we should get the same value for each segment AC and for AD. 2 times 4 would be 8, plus 30, which is going to be 38. And then 10 times 4 is 40, minus 2, which is also 38. So we know that we did our algebra correctly. This will conclude the lesson, and go ahead and look at the board and see what is next up on the agenda.